I was really, I think, blown away or surprised by like how cohesive our work looked together and how powerful it was in like its own materiality and form. Um, and because I like know all of you in some way, and I've seen your work and like here and there, but seeing like so much of it with the context of my work was really cool. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I was also just like really enjoying the show and seeing all of your works that were posted as part of the show. Um, I remember looking into like other things too that you both are doing, which was just like I feel like I'm still processing it because it was just really like powerful. And I think a lot about the merging of different mediums, and I think that's like sort of what this, or I guess like an idea of collage could sort of be in reference to. And so it was really cool because I love, like I think about it in my own practice, and it was really neat to see the ways in which you both are uh, bringing together these varying elements in ways that feel very cohesive and also tell a narrative in how they are brought together. Um, so yeah, that's maybe a little vague, but I was just, I feel like that's what I've been super enjoying about this show in particular.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised when the show was up, just with um one, I mean, like having a show like curated and seeing work beside each other on Instagram is a very I mean, I just haven't seen work kind of curated in that way. So I was really interested in how it would be done. But I was really surprised with how different and how relatable everybody's work was. And, you know, I mean, like, I mean, even thinking about collage and assemblage, but like how everybody's kind of really wrapping that into their own style. And even like the conversations, I mean, like with the little bit of information that was given in some of the descriptions or captions, I mean, like it seems like a lot of everyone's really um, thinking about the materiality of what they're working with. And it was just really interesting and pleasing to see.
On that point of materiality, Vessna, something I wanted to ask you about is like looking at your work. I think probably people have said like it's very formal looking, you know, you're using a really traditional medium of watercolor, but the work you do is like rooted in a lot of politic, right? Particularly around like women of color and fine art spaces. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Like, how did that get incorporated into your practice, and like, what does that mean for you as a fine artist?
Yeah, I love watercolor and I love talking about watercolor. um, but yeah, I it's also interesting. I was just thinking what you were saying about watercolor as a fine art medium. I feel like when I first heard about watercolor, it felt like it was more of a sketch medium, like not a fine art medium. And it even like in art institution settings, I feel like it's kind of looked down upon or like not valued as much as oil for sure. Um, and I yeah, I sort of originally came to watercolor because uh, I had heard that it was like a challenging medium, and I also wanted to do portraiture. And I was like, people are also like, well, portraiture is really hard, and I was like, well, let me just do watercolor portraits and jump right in. Um, and I wanted to paint people who I found weren't represented in the fine art spaces that I had seen. So I focused on painting women of color, Black women in watercolor, and found that it was a really effective medium, I felt like, for portraying depth and dynamic and delicacy in relation to people of color. I feel like just the variation that you get with the medium that occurs like within all of the, yeah, that just happens naturally with water, I feel like is reflective of how I think about women of color taking up space within these systems of oppression or of like confinement, that there is this space that is carved out within that that does not conform to that like dynamic. And so I love that watercolor like breaks the rules or like is hard to use, or like, you know, that it is constantly creating a space of liberation for itself. And I feel like that is how I have always like understood how women of color exist in the world, through my own life, through my family members, through the people that I know. I think about it as like carving out these spaces of freedom within oppression. And I feel like watercolor really speaks to that. Yeah, it often is seen as like, I feel like it's also seen in relation to femininity or something too, like watercolor. And then there's like, you know, oil. It's like, it's often like cast in that light. And so for me, it just feels like kind of the perfect medium to like talk about what I feel like I'm trying to talk about in my work.
Especially when you think about like art history and like, you know, Jackson Pollock's were like massive masculine macho paintings versus like a soft, you know, I'm saying soft, but it's like, I don't even know exactly what it is about watercolors that are soft. Maybe it's like color or the movement of the brush. Like, yeah, thinking about it like in terms of femininity. And Noel's not here now, and hopefully she's able to join soon. But when we had a conversation, she was talking to me about how her work is like for people in her community. Like, I think the thing she said was like, it's not for celebrities, it's like for people on my block, you know? And so like hearing you talk about like wanting to create portraiture of the people who are around you made me think about that. And then I guess I'll pass it to Chloe, or I guess Chloe or Jordan actually could answer this, but how much are you thinking about your audience and who your artwork is for when you're creating, and has that shifted over time? Who you're imagining that audience to be?
Yeah, I can answer. Yeah, I think audience is kind of always going in my mind when I'm thinking about, I mean, language or like location. You know, recently there's been a lot of I've been doing a lot of performance work, so um that's always one of the centering questions of like, where do I want this work to be, and to proximity to who. And I mean, it's kind of, I mean, it's constantly a shifting, it's a shifting thing. I mean, like, and I don't mind that community being changed, depending on what the work is talking about. And I think I, over the years have, being centered, I mean, coming from out of my art school, and then I was doing a lot of performance work. I was doing a lot of performance work in like DIY spaces, in some institutions and galleries. And I started to feel like it was, I was starting to disassociate a bit, because I was understanding that myself in this very white centered and occupied space was just, it was very, uh, it just felt as though the work and what I was trying to do with the work and uh, get from the work, it just couldn't be there. And just wasn't an audience that I wanted to talk to. And just figuring out like, how can I access the spaces that I want to, that's not in institutions and confined to those spaces, that and also increases the accessibility to it. So Yeah, I think even if it's public or accessible or not, yeah, I think it's always embedded into the work.
Yeah, like finding the right audience. Like you can have one audience in mind when you create something, but then being able to show it to that audience is like a whole other process.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, especially with like performance work. And I mean, like it was the first, I recently had a performance piece to where I kind of curated the space or created the space and, invited people or kind of like went through that process of what, in what way am I going to invite people? And what circles will that reach? And first time really engaging with all those just politics and thinking about that. And then also just at the end, like trusting that the people who needs to show up and want to show up, I mean, that you want to show up and is important to show up will. So, you know, yeah, a part of it is like trusting the process and yeah.
Um, Chloe, if you want to answer that question as well, I'd be interested to hear how you're thinking about audience, especially because I want to point out you recently released a book,
Yeah.
which I have a copy of. Um, there, no, there.
Wait, did you? Oh, I'll ask you about that later.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I when I was thinking about the answer to this question, I like wasn't even thinking about my book. But I was thinking about like the more like painting wall collage pieces that I make. Um, and I think the way that I approach those is that they're like kind of this collage work that reflects like the different parts of myself. And so I think audience, like I'm always considering that in the back of my head. Like I hope someone likes this or like it's pleasant to view or they can connect with this. The way like I'm finding myself connect with these different pieces that I like found objects or like collage material or gesture or emotion that comes through. Um, so yeah, but with my book, um, I think I was really thinking about like making something that people would have an experience like on a more intimate level, and thinking about like print as an intimate space. Um, yeah, because it's much different to hold something or hold a book, even in a public space. It's like you're pretty much experiencing that on your own. And then like getting to take it home and have it in like your room or more private space. Um, so yeah, I think like I'm always interested in seeing how people connect to the different parts, um, like different images or materials that I put in the work, because usually it's like I'll go for materials that evoke like a sense of nostalgia for me. And so when I'm talking to someone who has those same feelings, it's like a feeling of like collectiveness or like belonging, um, and like shared experience with the thing. And it usually initiates conversation about like a place or like this food that we ate, and then like different contexts or experiences eating that food. So I just, for me, it's like the the smaller conversations that can be had when looking at the work. I don't, yeah.
Yeah, when we first like had our studio visit, I think that was something that really blew me away, was like the references and the way you were thinking about it just felt so specific to like an experience I had growing up. I was like, oh my God, this is like really, really interesting. I mean, especially around like certain bodies and the depictions of bodies and the manipulation of bodies. And so could you just talk a little bit about like how that kind of stylistic practice like came to be, and how you got to that like method of working, particularly with like how you're working with imageries of like models, and I'm guessing like influencers, or I don't know, just like really hot, pretty ladies.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about, well, when I was making the book, in the back of the book, there's an interactive section where you can like make your own collage using imagery that I pulled from images, the images being sourced from like social media, Google, and like digitized adult magazine archives. And I remember speaking to you about like early 2000s, like online dress up games, dress up dolls, things like that, where it was like literally so sexualized and like feminized. And like I was like 10 years old playing like a dress up game where the like girls had like their nipples, like you could see their nipples and stuff like that. And it was just like so unnecessary. And also like probably informative to like my sexuality and like gender identity and how I think about all of those things. And so, and I think definitely influences how I think about making collage work in the process of like picking and choosing different parts of figures that are online, and kind of like recreating that process and like creating my own people or characters or like, yeah. Yeah, I don't, so that's how, I was kind of thinking about that a lot when I was making the book. And prior to COVID, a lot of my work sourced like materials from my immediate environment, which was like pretty much just my physical environment. And then with COVID, we stopped going outside, and everything really became digital, especially at first. So I was really finding myself like immersed in a digital space and started to pull content from online and social media to use in my work. Yeah.
Something I've been thinking about is how, like, with the process of collage, of bringing different things together into one experience, is how that's like kind of inherently an act of world building. Like, I think there's something really dreamy about all of the work that you all create, Noel included in that as well. Um, and Jordan, something that we've talked about, or maybe we didn't talk about this, and this was in some of your artist statement, where you had written about wanting to create new languages, or like new linguistic, or I guess maybe not necessarily linguistic, but like having like a new set of tools to like talk about or to experience like the way we're living our lives. Do you think about like your practice in terms of like, I guess as it might be the, you know, two different sides of the same coin of like world building, like creating something new versus like understanding like what's already here. But how are you thinking about your work in terms of like researching what new languages are out there?
Hmm. um, I'm gonna be honest. I mean, my brain is just it's farting, but I'm gonna try my best to articulate. Yeah, I mean, language is uh uh language. I think I'm constantly thinking about language, and that language can be encompassing of like all the different senses that we experience. There's a language to that. There's a language um uh to listening to things, and movements, and also the ways that language has these very uh yeah, my brain is farting. I need a moment to think.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. It's like a pretty complicated question. Yeah, like I guess like, do you feel like you're creating new realities or revealing realities that already exist? I guess if I could simplify that question.
Was that question for Jordan specifically?
Yeah, but if you have an answer, I'd be curious too. Or if you and Vessna have thoughts about that, I'd be interested in that as well.
I think with collage, it's kind of both. You know, you're responding to things that already exist and you're pulling parts that you're as like a process to try to understand it. And then like through you're sort of creating something through that process. Well, at least for me, like I feel that I create something new that reflects more of like me, or like I was saying, like different parts of me coming together to reflect like a wholeness of some sort.
Mm.
Yeah, can I also
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I think about, yeah, just in terms of collaging, like pulling together the pieces. I also think about it in relation to mixed identity, which I am. And so that also plays a role of like constantly being like multiple things while constantly like being one thing, you know? And this, and there are like multiple identities that people can hold that like also do that, you know? And so that way in which I feel like collage lets those things exist, like in the same space at the same time, to create a way of thinking about it that isn't, it's like, that isn't using the same exact like representation or same exact format as like the separate pieces, but that actually speak more truly to how things are conglomerates, like continually conglomerates. You know, like we are also conglomerates of like past and future, like, you know, in this moment. And yeah, I feel like it sort of allows for all those things to be happening at one time in a way that I really enjoy. And yeah, I feel like in looking at your work, and looking at both of your works, but Chloe, your work in particular, I was like just thinking about how that space is like made to exist kind of on the same plane at the same time. And that it's the viewer's kind of responsibility, or like it's the viewer's, the viewer brings to it kind of, you know, to like make sense of it. Sorry, I don't know how to say that exactly, but you like require the viewer to like make sense of all these things like happening at the same time, in the way that I think is helpful for people to be cognizant of, that like they are making those decisions and like deciding upon these conglomerates that they experience and then like packaging them, you know, as opposed to seeing them as they are, like these complex, like infinitely, yeah, infinitely complex people or experiences, you know. And I feel like speaking to language, as you were saying before, there was a quote that I had found on your website, Jordan, that ended in the phrase, to connect the tissues of the universe to the highway of our vertebrae. And I thought that was really beautiful. And I feel like just speaking of that, like making present all of these things at once into a way that like allows you to walk and move and think, like to the vertebrae thing, sort of like really attached it to like how we move through the world. And I thought that was a really beautiful like way to phrase that.
Yeah, Jordan.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just like, I am not good with words, so I'm just like blown away by your poetry. Like I feel like visual collage, there's so much there that it's like it forces you to really like slow your pace or like reread. And I like what Vesta was saying. I like I'm interested in work that like makes you do something or change how you interpret or like view something or like slows you down. Um, yeah, and I also was admiring everyone's work in the sense that like I felt like it was like Jordan and Vessna, like your video work, and like I just like, okay, I need to think about how I want to phrase this. I There was just like an activation to, it's like collaging different parts of your practice that maybe don't seem different, but different to me because I don't write or sing. But just like the layers of even that as like being collage, is just really beautiful and powerful. And I'm still like processing that. But it really stuck with me. And yeah, just thinking about that.
Yeah, something I'm curious about, Jordan or Vesna could answer this, is when you started writing, like, because I think you both kind of write and do poetry and text and lyrics and things like that. When did your writing practice start, and did it follow your visual arts practice? Did it come before? Did it kind of develop in tandem? How did that start for you all?
Um, I don't think I considered writing part of my practice, like at least an essential part of my practice until recently. Even though I mean, like, uh, sketching and journaling is kind of like what something that I just do every day. But uh, yeah, I think uh, it felt like text just allowed me. I mean, at least when I started inserting it in my work, it allowed me to kind of play with another um, quality or sense that I just couldn't touch with performance. And also, yeah. Um, yo, I'm sorry, guys. When it gets this late, I cannot get my brain to go. So I'm just gonna be jumbly for this. I'm gonna just be jumbly for this talk. Um, yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah, I feel
oh,
yeah.
yeah, like I hear you saying like text allowed you to do something that performance didn't quite get to. Um, but it's something that like you realized there was, like, you started with performance and then realized there was something else that was needed, and then like text was that thing that like worked for you. I'm curious, Cessna, did you have like a similar experience, or is your kind of like journey to writing a little bit different?
I feel like the text is pretty spontaneous in my practice. I don't usually like plan it out kind of ahead of time. Um, and it's sort of, I guess, similar to how I paint. Like I kind of like to move through things quickly. So another thing that watercolor allows me to do is to like do something and then do something else. Because there's like drying time and all of this stuff. It's very much like an interactive sort of process, it feels like. Um, so it feels similar to like when I write poetry. It like I sort of write it. It's usually the first thing that I write, and that's it. I don't usually like go back and edit and revise very much. Maybe like a little bit, but not a whole lot. And it usually feels like I want to give like clarity to something, to an idea that I feel like could, that is somehow maybe not present in the work, that it's more like a thing that's foundational to what you end up seeing. And so I feel like I want the text to function as something that like sets the mood for how you then like proceed in like experiencing the work, or that like shifts your perspective once you've seen it. So like I have the like these little collage pieces, and then I haven't written on the backs of these, but I'll usually write on the back of them. And for someone to pick up the front and kind of have their experience with it, and then to turn it over and like have a different experience with it, I feel like that's the role that I like text to play, to like shift how someone experiences the work and kind of what I'm thinking about in it.
I forgot to check exactly when we started talking, but I think we're close to like time for wrapping up. So I want to open up this question to everyone, which is, how has being in the show and looking at each other's work changed the way you think about creativity? And I think, you know, people say like art is creative, but I think there's something about this show in particular. I mean, I think with some of the things we've talked about like collage and how that relates to world building and revealing things and the streaminess. So yeah, I'd be curious to hear how it's changed how you think about creativity, also including like Noel's work in that conversation, which is like super incredible work, that I hope you all at some point can, maybe I'll like send over some text or something about how she approaches her practice, because it's really interesting. But yeah, I open that up to anyone who wants to go first and answer that.
For me, it was really, I think I mentioned this, but seeing how you all, Noel included, activated the work in a way that was like beyond process, or that was part of the process. Like Jordan, the piece, the video piece where it's your grandmother's voice recording, and you're working with the photographs and pouring this material on top of them, and then like at the end you hang like what could be the work, you know. So it's like the work is the video and all the pieces. It's the process and the final thing, which the final, I mean, I don't even know if the photographs serve as their own piece. It's a video, right? So that, yeah, that really resonated with me, and just thinking about like the process of my work. And I think there's parallels between like some of the things that maybe some of the ideas from that video and some of the ideas that I have during my process. So yeah, that just made me think about my work and process and different ways to activate my own work. And Vessna, with you like singing over like zoomed in sort of visual of your watercolor was really like, that was really moving too, because the watercolor kind of became a landscape that matched your voice. So yeah, and I'm just thinking, it has me thinking about my own practice, which I'm really grateful for. So very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think like, if this is the artistic process, you can choose to like activate like this part or this part. And like we think about activating this part, but it's like, what does this look like? Or like, what does the thing after that look like? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I was also inspired by that, yeah, by the process of documenting, and like what's chosen in terms of what sort of the art becomes or what the art is. yeah, and it was encouraging me to like share other stuff that I've done that I haven't really shared as much because I haven't quite like figured out how I like think about it or relate to it, I guess. But that seems to fit kind of more into that like mode of expression. So I did this piece called The Art Has Four Chambers, and I couldn't like come to school, like be in school last semester because my dad was diagnosed with lymphoma. And so he moved in with us and I was caring for him and he was getting like treatment, chemo. So like we couldn't go like anywhere pretty much as possible. And so the like space that, and then it was also like I couldn't like kind of be making things because it just was like too much of a transition. It was just like too much going on. So the art then became like these four chambers of the room. And it was supposed to say the heart has four chambers, but that was just like a typo. And then it became the art has four chambers. And that actually worked out well for that idea. But that like the art kind of exists in these other spaces and in these other ways. And in the video, I wasn't like, this video that I made, I wasn't painting or doing anything. I was like vacuuming and like wiping down surfaces and like picking up my dad from treatments, you know, like, and I hadn't really like, I've had kind of a hard time thinking about that as like art. Like I did it kind of like in relation to a class and also like as a response because it was like the only thing that I kind of could kind of do or like bring myself to be doing. And so, yeah, I feel like seeing your work in particular, Jordan, like made me think differently about that. Like, yeah, continue to realize that I can be expressive in other ways. And that can be really like nice to share, like beautiful to let people in on and to see other parts of the practice as being the work itself, you know? Yeah, so I feel like I was just thinking about that in relation to this show. And yeah, like revealing, letting other things be like part of the work in ways that feel really like opening or something for me, at least.
Yeah, a lot of times, sometimes I think as I'm working, um, I'm like in my head, I'm constantly, whether that is introspectively evaluating or thinking about like uh, my family's history and like their connections to the city or et cetera, whatever it is. And sometimes like just very, it could feel like a constantly this game of like was um this
like a whirlwind. It's just like a storm.
yeah but anyway but what I think was really interesting just to see everybody's work is kind of like the ways in which uh everyone worked with these materials that has a lot of history, has a lot of
Context?
context. I mean, that's close, but it just I can't think of the word. But it has a lot of not energy of people, but
Hmm.
Like weight.
history of people.
Mm.
Maybe like
Like it just has a lot of
essence, maybe.
yeah. I'm struggling with that one. It has a lot of
Like a poet.
no. Yeah, I think it just has a lot of traces of people, you know, culture, society, and you know, in the ways that it also allows people to enter that world.
Mm.
Just it just seemed very accessible,
Hmm.
which I enjoyed, and that also just reflects back to the viewer. Just very genuine and visceral lived experiences. And yeah, I want to say more, but for some, it's just I'm struggling.
Actually, like if I can cut you off, like something that
yeah,
I was thinking about was like, it seems like place and like where people are from or where they are now is like a really big thing in everyone's work. Like it feels like very on the surface. And I guess if someone wants to respond to that, they can. It's not really a question, but it is interesting, especially like thinking about ecology and like, you know, there's so many different overlapping ecologies that like make up what our lives are, and like place and where you're from and how that place has changed, is like a really big one that I feel like is really present in all of the work.
I think something I like just to respond to that about ecology and collage, thinking about that there's continually room for like people to further the narrative kind of like I feel like of like the work. I don't know if I can speak for everyone, but at least for me, in terms of when I think about collage, like I think about how people can like further the narrative of the work that I make, because it is like meant to kind of be like reconstructed, and that I'm reconstructing like past narratives too, and I enjoy that process. But like if someone could like move a piece, like they're taped on, like someone could move a piece on there if they really wanted to, or they could like cut it up, or like it's paper, so it's gonna like dissolve, you know, at some point, like sooner rather than later. And the fact that it'll make room for people to like say what needs to be said in the future. I also like that idea too about like about from what I was like taking that in from like the work that I was seeing in the show, but like it is also creating room and space for other narratives, while like sharing narratives that need to be shared presently with the work. And I think like also the work that you like wear that Noel makes, I also just think there's like so much like yeah there's just so much in that too, and that you like you are changing the work constantly, and the work is adapting to you, and just that relationship I feel like is just so so beautiful and necessary, that like things be allowed to shift and move, that it's not like creating something that is designed to like lock in, but that is like it is creating like space for new conversations and like new ways of looking at stuff. So just the title, like ecology and collage, I feel like really speaks to that. And then the work that I was seeing represented in this show, I feel like really emphasized that, which I thought was really beautiful.
Does anyone else have anything they want to share before we wrap up? Well, if not, we can end here. I'm gonna hit stop record.